air was cold, the kind that seeped into your skin, no matter how many layers you wore. The streets were eerily quiet for such a late hour, save for the occasional rustle of the wind and the faint glow of the streetlights. You were only out because your stomach had decided to protest the lack of dinner you had, and you figured a good late-night snack was a good excuse to stretch your legs. Turning the corner, you spotted a man lying on the middle of the sidewalk. At first, you just thought he might be drunk. This wasn't exactly the best part of town after all. But as you got closer, something about him made your chest tighten. His clothes were filthy. His face was pale and gaunt. There was this haunted look in his eyes, and it stopped you dead in your tracks. "Hey, are you okay?" you asked, your voice soft but laced with concern. Man didn't respond. Not at first. He just stared blankly ahead. Your presence hadn't registered. It was only when you knelt down beside him and his bloodshot eyes flickered towards yours, his lips parted and he wanted to say something, but it didn't work. No words came out. Oh, God. Alright, you're coming with me, you decided firmly, ignoring the protests in your rational mind. He didn't resist, just listened as you helped him to his feet, though he swayed dangerously, forcing you to wrap an arm around his boyish waist to steady him. My place isn't far, you said, guiding him down the street. His silence was unnerving, but you chalked it up to exhaustion. Who this man was, he'd clearly been through hell. When you got inside, you turned on the lights and helped him to the couch. He sank into it like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for the longest time. Just, sit tight, okay? You said, already heading to the kitchen. You filled a glass to the top with water and brought it back. Drink this, slowly. He obeyed, though his hands trembled as he took the glass. You watched as he sipped it, noting the way his eyes darted around the room like he was trying to make sense of where he was. What happened to you? You asked, gently, as he sat on the edge of the coffee table. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at the glass in his hands, his thumb tracing the brim. He spoke. His voice was hoarse and barely registered. I don't know where to start. That's okay, he said. You don't have to tell me anything right now. How about let's just get you cleaned up, yeah? He nodded. You stood up, offering him a hand. He hesitated before taking it. His grip was surprisingly weak. You led him to the bathroom and started the bath, testing the water until it was just the right temperature. You can take it from here, or I can help if I can stay, he interjected, his voice breaking slightly. Please. You froze for a moment before nodding. Okay, let's, get you cleaned up. He didn't protest as you led him to the edge of the tub. You worked the knots out of his hair. It was matted and tangled, though your fingers ached as you worked through it. But he didn't stop. He winced occasionally, but never pulled away. Once his hair was finally tangled free, you helped him into the bath, careful to give him as much privacy as physically possible as he sank into the water with a soft sigh, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. You stepped out to grab some clothes for him, an old sweatshirt and some sweatpants that were a little too big, but it looked like they could fit him just right. When you returned, he was staring at the water. His expression was unreadable. Here, he said, placing the clothes neatly folded onto the counter. Take your time. I'll make some tea. He didn't respond, but you caught the faintest of nods before you left the room, closing the door softly behind you. In the kitchen, you busied yourself with the tea, trying to make sense of the situation. Who was this man? What happened to him? And why did he look utterly broken. When you finally emerged, dressed in your clothes and looking magically better, you handed him a mug of tea and gestured for him to sit. "Thank you," he said. His voice was still quiet but steadier than before. He smiled softly. "Yeah, don't mention it. You look like you needed the help." He took a sip of the tea, his hands trembling slightly, and for a while, neither of you spoke. The silence stretched between you, but it wasn't uncomfortable. My name is Gi-Hun," he suddenly sighed, breaking the silence. You offered your name in return, and for the first time, he met your eyes. There was something in his gaze now, something that wasn't there before. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. The question caught you off guard, but you answered honestly. I, because someone needs to, and I've been where you are before. Not exactly, but, close enough." He didn't ask for an explanation, and you didn't offer one. Instead, you reached down and placed a hand over his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're safe here," you said softly. Gi-Hun stared at your hand, then back at you. For the first time since you'd found him, you thought you saw the faintest hint of a smile. But before either of you could say anything, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. Gi-Hun stiffered, his eyes widening with fear. Who could that be? You murmured to yourself more than anything, standing to answer it. But when you approached the door, you felt a sinking sensation in your gut. When you opened it, the sight made your blood run cold. The chill from the open door crept into the apartment, sending a shiver down your spine. Standing on the other side was a man in a crisp suit. His posture was rigid, and his expression was unreadable. Behind him, a sleek black car idled the curb, its tinted windows hiding whoever or whatever waited in there. Can I help you?" you asked, gripping the edge of the door with the unease settled in your chest. The man's gaze flickered past you, landing on Gi-Hun, who was now at the table. "Mr. Son," the man spoke in a calm but firm voice. "We need to speak privately." You glanced back at the man, whose face had been drained of color. His knuckles were now white as he gripped the tea mug, his whole body tense. "I don't think he wants to talk to you right now," you said, stepping slightly to block the man's view of him. "Maybe this should wait for later." "This is not a matter of convenience," the man replied, his tone clipped. "Please, I insist." Gi-Hun stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wood. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. The man sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is for your own safety. We strongly recommend." "That's enough," you interrupt. You were sharper than you expected. "He said he's not going. You're on my property now, so unless you want me to call the police, I suggest you leave." The man's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. After a moment, he just gave a curt nod and turned on his heel, turning back to the car. He shut the door firmly behind him, locking it for good measure. "Who was that?" you asked, turning to Gi-Hun. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sank back into the chair, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped the mug. You rushed over, prying it from his grip before it could shatter. "Gi-Hun?" you said softly, crouching down so that you were at eye level with him. "Talk to me. Who was that?" He let out a shaky breath, a hand running through his damp hair. "I don't know who they are," he admitted. His tone suggested otherwise, though. "But they know." "What? Know what?" you asked, though a part of you wasn't sure you wanted the answer. He looked at you, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. "About the games, about what I did, about the money." The words hung heavy in the air. You weren't sure what to say, but you knew that the This wasn't the time to push him for details. He was on the verge of a mental break, and the last thing he needed was more pressure. Okay, you said finally, keeping your tone gentle. Let's just focus. On getting through tonight. We can figure out everything else later. He nodded, though his expression remained strained. You stood and grabbed the tea mug, setting it on the counter before turning back to him. Why don't you try and get some rest? You suggested. You can take my bed and I'll sleep out here. I can't sleep, he murmured, his voice barely audible. You hesitated before moving to sit beside him. Then let's sit for a while. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, and I'll be right here. For a long time, neither of you said anything. The silence was heavy but not unbearable, like a calm before a storm. Gi-Hun stared at his hands, his mind clearly elsewhere, while you stayed by his side, offering a quiet comfort. Eventually, his breathing began to slow, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. You shouldn't have to deal with this, he said softly, his voice breaking in the quiet. Deal with what? You asked. Me, my problems. He looked up at you, his eyes filled with guilt. You don't even know me. You shouldn't have to clean up my mess. You frowned. Everyone deserves help when they're down. You don't have to face this alone. He looked away, his jaw tightening. You don't understand. People died because of me. He trailed off, his voice cracking. He took a minute of silence. Because you survived? You finished gently. His head flickered towards you, a snap of surprise. You did what you had to do, he continued, your tone steady. Maybe you feel guilty about it. I don't know the whole story, but you're here now. And if you want to make things right, you can, but not if you've destroyed you. He didn't respond, but you could see the conflict in his eyes. Whatever he had been through had left scars so deep that it would take a long time to heal. After a moment, you stood and grabbed a blanket from the couch, draping it over his broad shoulders. You're safe here, he said softly. Get some rest. We'll figure things out tomorrow. He looked up at you, his expression unreadable. For a moment you thought he might argue, but instead he simply nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. As the night stretched on, you stayed by his side, determined to be the steady comfort in his presence that he so clearly needed. But as you sat there, the nagging thought lingered in the back of your mind. Whoever had just come up to your door wasn't going to just walk away. And this time you weren't so sure if you'd be able to stop them, because they would be back. You shot up from your seat. It had been a few hours, you assume, and then now the knock came again, louder. Your heart pounded in your chest, and Gi-Hun froze, his knuckles wide as he gripped the edge of the blanket. Stay here, you whispered, though you weren't sure what good it would do. Your legs felt like lead as you approached the door, which each step echoed through the silent apartment. When you opened it, the man in the suit stood there again. But this time, he wasn't alone. 2 more men were stood, both larger and more far, imposing, flanked him. His expression was cold, professional, and unyielding. We gave you a chance to comply peacefully, the suited man said, his tone colder than before. But it seems you've decided otherwise. Your breath caught in your throat. You need to leave, you said, trying to keep your voice steady. You have no right. This isn't about rights, he interrupted sharply. This is about ensuring Mr. Songs fulfills his obligation. You felt Gi-Hun's presence behind you. Before you turned, he had risen. From the couch, his face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination. If you want me, fine, Gi-Hun said, his voice firmer than you expected. But leave them out of this. They're a stranger. They have nothing to do with this. What? Gi-Hun, no! You started, but he gave you a faint shake of the head. This isn't your fight, he said softly, his eyes filled with an unspoken apology. Before you could even argue, the suited man gave a curt nod, and the two larger men stepped forward. Wait! You shouted, panic rising as they grabbed him. The last thing you saw was the look on his face, resigned and somehow grateful, before the door slammed shut, leaving you in the silence of your now empty apartment. What the hell just happened? What did you do? I mean, this couldn't be any good, right? Bringing backup wasn't a good thing. It could only lead to something horrible, something violent. Did you need to call the cops in this situation? Should you just figure it out on your own? What do you do? You didn't know. You didn't know what to do. To be continued.